Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper, where we drive trucks on the American highways and byways, and we talk about role-playing games and other cool stuff. And we are currently leveling up. We're level 6 out of, I think, something like 36 levels in this game. Our career is going pretty well. We have currently delivered 365,000 pounds across 8 deliveries, serving 14 different depots and 13 different companies. We've explored 2.87% of the map, discovering 17 of 191 cities, 5 of 13 states so far, 1 of 76 truck dealers, and 1 of 54 recruitment agencies. We use the Western Star most, which is our favorite truck. We've driven 2,468 total miles on duty. We own 1 garage and employ only ourselves. 3 hours and 42 minutes of real time and 2 days and 13 hours of game time played. And we've had 2 total traffic violations for $340. And the next level is level 7. And so that's where we are right now. And what we want to do is get to about 125,000 or so, which will be enough to buy our first Western Star day cab truck, which we probably will take maybe this job and maybe one more. If it's just a small one, I might do it off screen. We'll see. I haven't done anything off screen really so far, and so we're going to take our first quick job and then we'll start our next rant. So let's see. Oh my gosh, 78,000 for Wyoming to California. Oh, that is going to be a trip, guys. That's a bit much. Let's see, we have Fort Worth to, oh, that's going to be a repeat of some areas. Colorado to Gillette is fairly new territory. It's only 19,000 bucks. Wyoming to Phoenix is going to be some repeats, but then, oh, it's not too bad. I don't know if we can make it all that way in one episode. If not, I'll finish off screen. So we're going to be repeating some areas, and then after we get out of Colorado, all the New Mexico and Arizona stuff will be new. I don't know if we visited. Have we visited Phoenix? I'm not sure if we have, and I'm not sure if we've visited Albuquerque either. But we haven't visited Raton, Santa Fe, Gallup, Holbrook, Flagstaff, or Camp Verde. So let's go ahead and take this job for 64,000, and that will be more than enough to purchase our first truck. And we're taking a boom lift. Ouch, that's going to be a big one, I think. And we're just going from Cheyenne to Phoenix, and then we're going to need to probably teleport to the dealer. I think we can do that, and then we can go ahead and purchase our first truck. So that's the plan. It is nighttime. So let's start up our engines and turn on our lights and our high beams and shift into drive and hit 2 to go out. Okay, we got a really big one. This is one of these articulated jobbies, and we have to go around to the left. So as usual, guys, I'm going to try and talk about things after we get out of this. I have to be a little bit concentrate-y to make sure I don't crash into anything. As we make our wide turns and try to get this thing around to the... Oh! Is that the wrong way to go? It doesn't look like we can get in that way. This is like so typical of a real-world GPS, where if it's not out on the highway, it won't tell you where to go. So this is obviously the wrong way, I think. So we're going to have to go the other way. Now I got to turn all the way around with this horrible load. See if we can make it without jackknifing, or whatever they call it. Very close to hitting, and I don't know if we're going to jackknife. Hopefully not. Wide enough turn. I guess we're okay. I have no idea how to get out of here, which is actually quite frustrating. I might be going the wrong way this way. I just don't know. Nope, this isn't the right way either, guys. I don't know. I'm not sure how to get out. Can't get out that way. Got to turn back around. I guess the other way was the way out. And one of the problems, of course, is that it's nighttime, so I can't see anything. I I applaud video games' efforts to make darkness realistic, but when you can't see what the heck you're doing as a player, it's incredibly frustrating. And I also find it frustrating because when you spend a lot of money for a good graphics card, you want to actually see the graphics. I'm going to make one attempt more to figure out how to get out of here, and then if not, I'm going to abort this mission, and we'll just try another one, because this is getting stupid. Is there a way out? Is this seriously the way out? There's, like... Are they kidding with this? Yeah, I guess so. It's, like, completely blocked. I'm not sure... Oh, maybe I was supposed to come out the other way. Okay, I guess I was supposed to... Well, it's right in the middle. Why would you build something like this? I guess this is just a puzzle to try and see if they can get you to damage your trailer on the way out. Don't know. Alright, so it looks like we've possibly made it. And now we just need to turn right. And I think we'll be alright. Wow, that was quite messy and not at all pleasant. I don't know why you would design the stockyard like that. And not have any lights or anything to direct the player as to where to go. It's just kind of ridiculous. But anyway, we're out. And we're ready to get on this road. And once we're on the road, we will start talking about rule books and adventure books and why they're written the way they are. And you know, I've been very critical of them, and I've recently had some insight into why they're written as badly for the purposes of gameplay as they are. So I'm actually going to start with what seems like a tangent, and then eventually we will build up to what I want to talk about as the main topic. So first we're going to go back, and we're going to talk about Matt Colville, who discussed how to roleplay. So he's got a video. It's an excellent video if you've never watched it and you want to learn more about like what it means to actually roleplay. He's got an excellent video called something like How to Roleplay, or What is Roleplaying? I think that's what it is. And he made this video because he said he feels like a lot of people are new to the hobby, or maybe have been in the hobby for a while, sort of, and you'll see what I mean when I get to it. And they have a distorted sense of what role-playing is. So what he talked about was all the people who think that doing voices and essentially voice acting and maybe cosplaying is role-playing in a role-playing game. And many of them think that because of the shows that are presented as players playing a role-playing game around a table, but they're actually actors who are playing a role-playing game around the table, but they're employing their acting craft, and they're doing a lot of performative role-play for the cameras that's quite different from how you and I would play in a normal role-playing game at the table, classically. And, you know, he called out Critical Role, not in any negative way, but just as the biggest one of these shows, and he pointed out that all of the people on Critical Role are voice actors. He knows them personally. He's run games for them. And he said really the biggest difference between them and other players is that they very verbally narrate their own successes and failures quite sort of fluently and descriptively. And most regular players don't do that. But what he said was that this isn't really... You know, the performative stuff isn't role-playing, it's performance. And role-playing is just having your character do what your character would do instead of what you would do. And he talked about how he'll often ask players, he'll say to the player, yes, that's what I know that's what you would do, but what would Simon of Argostan do, who's your character? And Simon might have a different take on things than you would have as a modern 21st century, you know, American or Brit or Aussie or whatever. And so he said if you're having your character do what your character would do instead of what you would do, you are role-playing. But he said a lot of people get their idea of role-playing from these shows, and in particular of D&D from Critical Role. And he said, why is that? Like, why did Critical Role take off? It's popular now as an existing show that people have heard of as a show, and they come to it that way. And that's been the case for some years. But why did it take off in the first place? Right? It took off. It was an unknown thing. If you've ever seen the old episodes, the production quality is not great. The sound isn't great. It's actually tough enough to watch that I tried to watch the first episode. I couldn't watch it. And I started with the first episode of season 2, which I found much more watchable because it's filmed in a studio on a set with better sound, and they've got a crew, and they had money, which they didn't have when they started. They literally did start as a bunch of people at like a gaming cafe around a table with a couple of mics and a couple of cameras, and it was pretty bad production quality, and it was just them playing D&D. And they were role-playing, but they weren't performing it as much as they did in the second season, at least not the first few episodes. So why did anybody watch this when it first started? Matt Mercer has gone on record as saying, you know, he just wanted to show people how D&D is played and how his group plays D&D, and he expected it to go for a few episodes and that hardly anyone would watch and it would get canceled, and it somehow took off. Why did it take off? Matt Colville has a really interesting answer that I wouldn't have come up with. I would have come up with a whole bunch of different stuff. But what he said was, he thinks it took off because for all the history that D&D and these other role-playing games have existed, they've been niche hobbies that only a small fraction of people play. And he said he believes there are way more people who want to play D&D than who have ever gotten to actually play it. And that there were probably tens of thousands of people who have bought the books. Maybe they've got all the books going all the way back to the first box in 1974. They bought the books, they've read the books, they know all the rules by heart from having read them over and over again, but they've never, ever found anyone who wants to play with them. And so as a consequence, they don't actually know what it plays like to play D&D at the table. They can only imagine from reading the examples what it would be like to get together with their friends and actually play Dungeons and Dragons and roll dice and do hit points of damage and take damage and make saving throws. They don't know what it's like. And he said for the first time, when Critical Role first came out, all of these people who had 3 or 4 or 5 editions worth of D&D books on their shelves and had never gotten to play it or experience what it was like to play the game with their friends, got to watch what it looks like and sounds like and seems to be like and feels like to sit around the table and play Dungeons and Dragons with your friends. This group of friends is filming themselves doing just that, and you can now see, yes, it's their version of the game, it's their house rules, they're being very performative and all of that, but it's something, right? And it's showing these people who've never, ever gotten to do anything but read the rule book how to play this role-playing game and what it's like, right? They understand how you roll for initiative, but how does that play at the table? It can be hard to imagine if you've never actually played in a role-playing game. And I have a colleague at work, she's played MMORPGs, but she's never played a tabletop role-playing game, and she literally can't imagine it. And several times she's actually grilled me about it and said, but I don't understand, like, how do you do this and how do you do that, and like, who decides this, and what, you know, like, if there's no computer controlling the enemies, who controls the enemies? Well, the dungeon master does. But, like, don't you want the players to win? Well, yeah, of course. Okay, but then isn't it too easy? No, you make it hard and challenging. Sometimes the characters die. You let the characters die, right? She can't picture it. She literally cannot picture it. Even though she's played World of Warcraft for years, she can't picture sitting around the table playing a role-playing game with pencils and paper and dice. She just doesn't get it, right? And so I think the same thing is true of these people who have read the rules but haven't really ever played the game. It's very hard to picture how things would work at the table. How initiative is called, how you report your die rolls, right? A great example, I watched The Chain of Acheron, which is Matt Colville's show, and they did something I've never seen anybody do, but I think is quite brilliant. When they roll an attack, his players pick up their 20-sided die to roll to hit, and they pick up whatever their die is for damage. Let's say it's a D8, and they roll them both. If they hit, they've got the damage already rolled, and they just read it off to Matt. If they miss, they just sweep both dice off the table. So he does this to save time, right? You already know what your damage die is. You just pick up both dice and you throw them both, or all 3 dice if you're doing 2d6 damage or whatever. I've never seen that before. When I saw it, I was like, you know what? If I was at the table, I don't play at the table, right? I play in Foundry, but if I were at the table, I would say do that. It's quicker. It doesn't save much. It saves maybe 10 seconds per person, but if you have 6 people and a GM, you know, making rolls in a round, that's saving a minute per round. You do 4 rounds, you just save 4 minutes. Doesn't sound like much, but built up over 10 combats, that's 40 minutes. That's a big chunk. That's like a whole extra encounter you could get in every so many sessions. That actually adds up. And so I was like, hey, that's actually pretty cool. I also watched Matt rolling in front of the screen. His players saw every roll. I never did that either. Now, I'd heard of people who do that, but I'd never done that either. And so you watch, there are all these different ways to do it, and if you've never played, a lot of this doesn't even occur to you. So what Matt Colville argues is the initial popularity of Critical Role came from the tens of thousands of people who've always wanted to play D&D and never could, watching, wow, this is what it's like when people sit around and play D&D. I've always tried to imagine it. Now I actually know what it's like. But except for that show, before that show, all they could do was read the books and imagine what it was like. This is an important point. Keep it in mind because we're going to come back to it. The next thing, the next little piece of information, is both Matt Colville and Luke Hart from the DM Lair have complained quite correctly, and I have made many of these same complaints, about the way adventure modules and published adventure books are presented. They are horrible. They might be well-written English, but they are absolutely non-functional as usable entities for the game master. I've always known you have to spend almost as much work ripping apart a module and taking notes on it and screwing around with it, cutting parts out and adding new parts and whatever to fit not only to fit your group, but to just friggin' understand what's going on in the module. You have to spend so much work, it's almost easier to homebrew. It's just a little saves you a little work in that they create all the bad guys and the NPCs for you, and if you're not good at that or you don't have time for it, that does help. But it doesn't help you in almost any other way. Matt Colville says that when you open these old school modules, and I remember this, what they say is read the entire module from cover to cover, you know, from page 1 to page N, you know, 28 or whatever, all the way through at least once and preferably more than once. And Matt Colville said, no, don't do that. For most adventurers, go to the back. Go to the end of it and find the part of the adventure where they detail the encounter with the bad guy, the main bad guy, the big bad evil boss, the BBEG, right? The big bad evil guy. And read that. Because that's where the game, the module will usually tell you who's the bad guy and what's he trying to do. What's his goal? What's he trying to accomplish? That's the most important thing to know as a GM. They don't tell you that at the beginning. This is a module about an evil necromancer who wants to summon the undead and conquer the town. No, it doesn't. It starts out as this is a sleepy little town that usually doesn't have any trouble, but that's about to change. And then the first encounter is some zombies attacking the town, and you don't really know why, and it drops some clues. And so the way it's written is almost like for the players rather than the GM, because it's almost like it's trying to avoid spoilers, but you're the game master. There are no spoilers. You need to know everything. And so it's very disorganized in that way. Luke Hart then complained additionally a couple of things. One, he complained that the lore is almost always sprinkled throughout the adventure where the players encounter it. So if they find a book of the deities in the library of the second story of the castle they're exploring, that's where the book is shown and that's where the lore is. If an NPC bartender knows the name of the true name of the sorcerer, that's where it'll be. Not in the sorcerer's stat block, but in the part of the adventure where the barkeeper tells it to you. Now, you might want to have it where the barkeeper is, but you darn well need it in the stat block. And so what Luke Hart said is there should be a lore section where all of the lore is repeated in one place in a summary so that the GM has all the lore at his fingertips or her fingertips at all times. This is the lore chapter, and I can go to it to look up all the lore in the book. And most books don't have that. The other thing he complained about is that they write these walls of text, like 150-word paragraphs. In the paragraphs are interesting information, but it's surrounded by unnecessary fluff that's written like it's a novel. And Blood Drive from Deadlands did this, and I actually complained about it in the Savage Worlds Discord, which is where I got the answer that I'm leading up to by the end of this video. But it will be a while, so stay with me. In Blood Drive, for example, it might say, well, partner, this sheriff isn't as honest as he seems, because it turns out that he used to be an outlaw, and he got in trouble with the law back in Arizona in 1879, and he's been hiding out from Johnny Law ever since, right? Well, you know, that sounds nice, but as a GM, what I need is a bullet point that says sheriff equals outlaw running from Arizona Territorial Rangers. Right? That's what I need to know to run the session. All that other stuff is just narrative fluff that doesn't add any information. It's just stylized. And so Luke Hart was talking about this with regard to many adventures, that they're written like this, and what you really need is a bulleted list with boldface terms of all the important keywords. And if it's a PDF document, hyperlinks to click on where you can click on the things it's referring to. That's how Luke Hart makes his Lair magazine adventures, and he showed one as an example, right? Bulleted lists, call out text for the the read aloud text that are blocked out, but other than that, it's not paragraphs, it's bulleted lists, boldface terms, and all the lore up front, right? And probably tells you right at the beginning, here's what the plot is, and here's what you're doing in this adventure, and here's the big bad guy, right? This is what Matt Colville asks about. This is what Luke Hart says you should do. Apparently, Kelsey Dion, who's the maker of the hit Kickstarter game Shadow Dark, also writes adventures this way. Right? This is game masters writing content for other game masters. It's what we need to run something. But it's not how any published adventures from the big companies, Paizo with the adventure paths, D&D with the hardcover books like Storm King's Thunder and so on, or most of Pinnacle's stuff, right, like Blood Drive. It's not how any of that is written. The rest of it is all the main publishers write it almost like a novel. And it's utterly useless as a functional piece of DM material. Utterly useless without doing massive amounts of work. So I then mentioned this about Blood Drive, and I said, in Foundry, I have to copy every chapter of the 9 chapters in the book, edit the chapters, and take the walls of text and turn like each paragraph into a one-line bullet, so I know what the heck I'm running at the table. I can't sit there and read 4 paragraphs to find out the important information when the players are sitting there in the session asking me questions or talking to an NPC, and I'm trying to figure out what's this NPC's personality like. It's buried in the 3rd or 4th paragraph. I take that stuff, I bullet list it, just a 1-word or a 2-word description of the personality, and I put it not even in the journal, but on the actual character sheet of the villain. So it's right there when I open his character sheet. I see what his personality is. We need to get gas here, by the way. This is a long trip and we don't have a big enough tank, so we do have to get gas. I just noticed that. We have a little ways, but I've got to look for gas station the next time I see one. So let's hit the map. I'll show you how I can do this, and we'll come back to my rant. So we're going to zoom in a little bit here. And let's see, what's going to be the easiest gas station to hit? Can we make it all the way over here? $229 miles, that might be a bit far. I think we're going to have to, let's clear this one. So that's how you make like a little GPS symbol here. Let's just go here and grab it. And then we'll get back on the road. I'm driving at Kenworth, by the way, which these are nice trucks. So we have the GMs making stuff for GMs, right? And me having to rewrite the stuff that's made by the professionals. And so I was grumbling about this, that I have to go in and make these bulleted lists to make it all runnable at the table. And Donald Shepis, who's I think the community manager for Pinnacle and reads the unofficial Savage Worlds Discord sometimes, he said why this is, right? And this is something I did not know. He said the reality is that the big publishers know, and Pinnacle I guess knows, that from data, that only about 10% of the people who purchase an adventure module will ever actually run it. Or I would say, he didn't say this, but I'll say maybe even Game Master at all. The other 90%, of the people who buy an adventure module are never going to run it, but they like to read it and imagine what it would be like to run it. And for those people, bulleted lists and bold-faced terms and read-aloud text really doesn't matter. They're essentially reading it like a novel, and in their head, instead of imagining the story of the novel, they're imagining themselves and their friends playing the game at the table. Maybe they don't have, go back to Colville's point, maybe they don't have anyone to play Storm King's Thunder or Tomb of Annihilation with, right? Maybe they don't have anyone to play Blood Drive or Stone in a Hard Place or one of the Pinnacle adventures with. And so instead, what they do is they buy the module, the adventure, and they read it from front to back, and they imagine playing it. And this is actually potentially a really solid reason for why you would write these adventure modules the way they tend to be written. That is to say, as if there are spoilers, right? We don't tell you about the big bad evil guy till the end when you get to the climax, right? A GM doesn't care about spoilers, and they need to know who the BBEG is from the beginning. But somebody who's just reading the book for fun might actually prefer not to have that information until the end, because it's kind of spoilers for them. And so I did not realize that this was the case, right? I just assumed, look, I have tons of books I've bought and I've never used, but I bought them with the intention of hopefully someday being able to run them. I've got a whole shelf of Savage Worlds stuff that I didn't think I was ever going to use because all of my friends seem to be D&D enthusiasts only. And not only am I running Deadlands and using the Deadlands book and the Deadlands Companion, but I'm also using the Blood Drive campaign, right? Which is the one I've had to modify. But it isn't one I ever thought I would be able to use, right? Because, after all, am I going to be able to get through this? It isn't one I ever thought I'd be able to use because I didn't think I'd be able to get my friends to play Deadlands. Can we get through here? Okay. But with Blood Drive, like, I didn't read it. I skimmed it, right? I glanced through it to see if it was a module I might want to run for my friends, right? And so I read through it. I read the ending, you know, to see who's the bad guy. I said I'm gonna have to make some changes. I didn't like this. I don't like that, you know, etc. And I registered, man, I'm gonna have to make outlines of all this stuff because of the way it's written, right? But I wasn't trying to read it to imagine playing with them and only do that. I was looking through it to say, okay, just get myself enough information to see if I might want to run it, and then when it's time to actually run it, I'll read through the thing and try to run it. Hopefully these guys will let me pass. Please don't hit me. Please stop. Thank you. All right. And now we can get back on the road, back on the highway with our full tank of gas. At some point, we're going to need to rest as well, but I don't think we need to do that right away. We still have a few hours. Wait a minute. Turn. Sorry, I was taking a sip of water. So, the reason that so many adventure books are written more like a novel than like an actual adventure you can run is because they're not being written for people to run. Are you going to let me go? Thanks, guys. They're being written for people to read and not run them. Because that's the primary audience. 90% of people who buy these books never run them. They just buy them and read them and enjoy the reading of them and fantasize about running them, but don't actually run them. And that's why, and I've complained about this in other videos, that is why I always grumble about these modules, right? I've always said the Champions ones are horrible. Now, I do think there's an additional wrinkle, which is that many of these modules are written by frustrated novelists or comic book writers or people who want to be published fiction writers, and they can't get published, so they take the story they always wanted to tell, like the Coriolis Effect by Dennis Maloney, which was a Champions adventure. It was a terrible Champions adventure. I hated it. I tried to run. I could not run it as written because it was all about Coriolis, the character who started out a normal person and then got more and more powerful with these wind powers because her father or somebody was experimenting on her. And it was all about her. It was her story. She was the main character. And the player characters were just along to watch her story unfold and kind of be there to help her fight villains. But it was about her. She was the main character. And I got really frustrated with it, and I changed a lot of it. It was not a bad story if it had just been a comic book. And I know I say comic books. Dennis Maloney was a comic book writer. He wrote the Hero Games comic books. He wrote the Champions comic and the Flare comic for a while. I think Aaron Alston did some of that, and maybe Bruce Harlick as well. But Dennis Maloney wrote a lot of it, and for a while he was writing, like, they had 3 or 4 comics in their line, and he was writing them all: Flare, Champions, and I think Marksman. And he also wrote a bunch of their modules, and he wrote the Great Supervillain Contest, and that's another one where it's very, I mean, these are all very railroady. By the way, so is Blood Drive. By the way, so are apparently a bunch of the published D&D adventures. They're very railroady, and you basically have to go through them in order, and all the stuff that's in the book has to quote-unquote happen, or the story won't work. And the reason it's like that is in part because the people writing them are writers rather than game masters. But I think the other reason it's like that now I think this, is that they also realize that most of the people reading the book aren't going to run it, so it doesn't need to be flexible. It doesn't matter that it's a railroad. It's better that it's a railroad because it leads you to a really strong story. So the way you can pick these out is when you read the thing and it says, no matter what the players do, Coriolis is going to turn into a wind elemental in this scene. I hate stuff like that, right? Because then it means, why are we playing? No matter what they do, no matter what the die rolls say, this happens. But they have to say that because the next scene requires her to be a wind elemental. And you'll break the adventure. The entire adventure hinges on the fact that Coriolis turns into a wind elemental, loses control, And at the end, the players are going to have to either fight her or talk her down. And in fact, I think in the book, and I don't have it anymore so I can't check, I feel like they were supposed to fight her, but they had become very good friends with her in her secret ID, and I knew they weren't going to want to take her down. So I made it possible for them to talk her down. And she ended up joining the team as a backup hero after things were over. Should we rest here? Let's just go ahead and rest here. It's going to put us back to nighttime, which is annoying, but let's just go ahead and get the rest in, and you guys can see how that works. So we come over here, and we get into a rest area. And you've got to get in close enough that it will register. Here we go. So I'm going to block this area. I don't care. I don't think it does anything. You turn off the engine, you hit rest, and you just rest for 8 hours, or 10 hours. And then we're done. Now you can see that the little bed is now not blue anymore. It's transparent, and we should be okay. We have how many hours to go on this trip? We've got all the gas we need now. As we get out of here, it'll put back up the distance. 9 hours. We should be able to go 9 hours without needing another rest. I think you can go about 12. So yeah, so Coriolis ended up being like a backup character who came into the story a few times later when they needed like extra muscle. They would contact her, and you know that wasn't supposed to happen. I don't think. I think she was supposed to like disintegrate and like dematerialize and become one with the atmosphere or something. And I just read that and said, no, that's stupid. My players aren't going to like that. But it's the reason it was written that way was because that was Dennis Maloney's story, and he was just putting it into a module because he guess he couldn't get it published as a comic book, right? And also, I guess, because it made for good reading, and I guess there was a level at which he knew nobody's ever going to actually run this as an adventure. They're just going to read it as a book, and as Donald Shep has said, imagine themselves running it as an adventure, and they're never going to do it. I don't know if the guys who wrote Champions back then had the same stats, and I don't know what the stats were back then on what percentage of people were buying Champions products and never actually playing Champions. I mean, I've done some of that. I have 5th edition Champions. I've never actually played it. I played 4th edition and 2nd and 3rd, but I never played 5th edition Hero System. I bought the book. I have it sitting on my shelf. I read through it, but I've never used it, and I don't like it, so I wouldn't use it if I ran Champions. I've got tons of Call of Cthulhu stuff. Can't convince anybody to let me run it for them. My group right now, in addition to our Deadlands game, we're planning to do some play-by-post. I propose let's do a second campaign. I'm not getting enough role-playing from the barely once every 2 weeks, and often we postpone. And we're having a lot of trouble with, you know, time because of, you know, everybody living all over the world, and several people are parents. And my colleague at work has never been able to rejoin us because of he can't do it when we're doing it in 11 o'clock in the morning on our local time. But he said he could do the play-by-post. So I invited him to join it, and most of my group, except my best friend, who seems a little lukewarm on the idea, said, yeah, let's do some play-by-post. We can run another campaign. And I'm going to run it. And so I proposed several things. I proposed we could try ETU, which is Savage Worlds. I proposed we could try Holler, which is Savage Worlds, and I have those setting books. I proposed that we could try using the Harn setting with Savage Worlds and Fantasy Companion, which is what we ultimately picked. But I also proposed, and I was pretty enthusiastic about, either Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu. Delta Green just is basically a modern sort of spycraft spin-off. It's like Call of Cthulhu with spies, kind of. And it's cool. That was my #1 choice. I've got the entire box set of the rule books plus The Night at the Opera, which is a series of beginner adventures for Delta Green. Nobody was interested. One person actively said that's based on some of the mechanisms, it's a hard pass for her. She wouldn't be able to play it. Just because some of it bothers her. I mean, it's horror, and it's pretty terrifying horror, and it's pretty... Call of Cthulhu is pretty raw. I mean, your character can go insane and stuff. One or two of the players are interested in doing that, but the others are not, and as a consequence, I can't convince them to do it. right? So I've got a whole entire shelf of Call of Cthulhu stuff, and for me, I'm just a reader of it. However, I still do want to run it, right? And I actually haven't read most of it because I figure, well, I'm not going to read it unless I know I'm going to run it, because otherwise I might have an opportunity to play in it, right? So like I have the D&D starter set with the Lost Mine of Phandelver. I've glanced through it. I have an idea what the adventure's about, but I've never tried to read through it because I never intended to run it. And I always thought maybe someday somebody's going to want to run me through it. And so I don't want to spoil it. So I personally never read adventures just to read them. I read them to see if I want to run them. I read them to prepare for running them. And that's it. I don't read them just to read them and pretend I'm going on the adventure in my head or whatever. I don't do that. And so it never occurred to me until Donald Shep has said this yesterday, as I record this, that there are not only a few people, but the overwhelming majority, 9 out of every 10 people who buy an adventure book from Pinnacle and presumably Wizards of the Coast and Paizo, are buying them to read them only and have no real expectation or intention of actually running them at the table or over the Zoom. And I find that really surprising, but it also explains why these adventures are written the way they are. They're horribly non-functional. And he admitted it, right? He said, it is frustrating as a game designer and an adventure writer. We would like to write adventures that are more focused around being useful for the GM, but we also need to pay our rent. And, you know, you're going to sell 10 times as many copies writing it like Blood Drive and just being useless to the GMs than you are writing it the way Luke Hart does, I guess, at the DM layer, and only writing it to GMs. Now, Luke Hart's aware of what he's doing, right? His channel is for game masters, and he's often been asked, will you make some, you know, player advice stuff? And he said, not really. He said there are tons and tons of great channels out there. The overwhelming majority of them are for players, and they tell you how to do builds and all of that stuff. And he said, which way are we going here now? I think we're going this way, right? Yeah. He said the overwhelming majority of them are for players. This channel, his channel, is for game masters, and his magazine, Lair Magazine, is for game masters, and his books are for game masters. And he said, I know I'm giving up a huge chunk of the market by catering only to GMs, but he said that's what I do, and I try to do that very, very well, and I don't want to try to do both because everybody else is already taking care of the players. They have enough help. The GMs need help, right? And Matt Colville is kind of doing that too, although he does a lot of advice for players as well. It's just like 70-30 GMs to players on Colville's channel, but it's almost like 99-1 GM material versus player material on the DM layer. I mean, it's called the DM layer, not the D&D layer, right? And he's writing stuff for game masters, and his channel is for game masters. And when he does his live streams, players can come in and ask him questions, but he'll answer them occasionally, but he does say, look, I'm mainly here to answer questions for game masters, not for players. You can ask them, but you're at the bottom of the priority list because the game masters get the priority, right? His subscribers and his Patreon subscribers and stuff get the highest priority, and the people who donate money. But then once he's done with them and he's just answering the regular questions, he's going to be trying to help the GMs, because there's hardly anybody else out there helping GMs. Most people are helping players. Dungeon Craft helps GMs. Dungeon Masterpiece helps GMs. And Matt Colville helps GMs. But the overwhelming majority of channels, 95% of them, are player-oriented. And they're helping players do character builds or understand role-playing or whatever. And Luke said, I don't need to do that. I'm writing and producing content for game masters. It's content produced by GMs for GMs, and so his content is like that. But the regular publishers can't afford to only cater to GMs, right? And in fact, you know, the people at D&D talked about this, and they said, you know, they called it 20% of their market, but I think 10% is much more accurate, if not less, that something like a DM guide or a monster manual that only has DM material in it is not going to sell. So that's why in something like Wild Beyond the Witchlight or Strixhaven, which are setting books that should be directed at GMs, there are player options, new subclasses, new sub-races or races, new spells, and all this stuff for players, because they know that they'll sell 10 times as many books. And the fact that the players are going to buy the book and then potentially have all these spoilers doesn't matter to the people, right, you know, trying to sell the books, because what they're trying to do is sell books, and as Donald Shep has said, pay the rent, right? And paying the rent comes from selling as many books as you can, not from protecting the GM from the players getting spoilers or helping the GM to more efficiently run the game, because 90% of the people who buy these books don't run them. And it also explains, by the way, this also explains why so many role-playing games, the books, the rule books, are readable, but ambiguous, confusing, potentially hard to run at the table. They don't tell you everything you need to know to do this. You have to come up with stuff because they didn't explain this, or the explanation is very hard to implement at the table. And the reason is that if all you're going to do is read the rulebook and not play the game, it doesn't really matter if what they've described isn't playable. If it isn't balanced, who cares if it's balanced? 90% of people reading this book won't even make up a character, let alone make up the overpowered subclass, right? Or if they make up a character, they're just going to go to D&D Beyond and make up characters for fun, but they're not going to play them. You see this all the time in D&D Beyond, and I was always wondering, like, what's going on here? People here rate my build. Why? Your build has to be approved by the GM, and it's not going to come in as written anyway, unless you're really lucky with the GM. You might be using a subclass or a subrace or whatever that he doesn't allow in his world, etc., etc. These people make a build, you know, rate my, you know, 3 paladins, 7 rogue, 10 warlock build. And I look at this and go, that's a level 20 build. When are you ever going to use it? Answer apparently is never. They don't actually expect to ever play this character. They don't play D&D. They just read the books and make up characters. Right? Very few people have a single D&D group to play in consistently. You know, D&D Beyond has like 14 million accounts or something, and my guess is 140,000 of those people are in games, and the other, like, almost 13 million don't. They'd like to play in games, but they don't have a game to play in. They don't have anybody to play with. And so it doesn't matter if the new subclasses are overpowered, I guess, because most of the people buying the books aren't going to play. And as long as they buy the books, what does Wizards care if it's overpowered? Yeah, the 10% of the audience that plays the game will grumble, and they might influence the readers into grumbling too. That's what happened with the OGL scandal, right? The people who don't play the game, I mean, maybe they would have been upset because they'd get less reading material, right? If D&D yanked the OGL and Paizo and Pinnacle and Kobold Press and Matt Colville and you know, all these other publishers, Frog God Games and Troll Lord Games, and all these guys who are making Goodman Games who are making third-party D&D adjacent content using the OGL, suddenly can't publish books anymore. That could really impinge on the readers as well as the people who are actually trying to play games. But as long as those people can publish books, the readers wouldn't care. I would guess. It might not even matter what game system you're in, if you're just a reader and you're just reading the adventure for fun. So, yeah, this was a very eye-opening statement to me that only 10% of the audience actually engages with the content in the way you think it's meant to be engaged. So, in reality, what's happening? So here's what I thought was happening, and here's what's actually happening. What I thought was happening was the people writing adventures were trying to write adventures that they thought we would run. And that some people are like me, and they buy an adventure they plan to run but never run it. But that the bulk of the audience, the intended audience, the goal of the writing, was to write an adventure that you play at the table with your friends as written. Okay? But what's actually happening is that since almost nobody plays these adventures, the people writing them are writing an adventure that's fun to read. And whether it's playable or not really doesn't factor in. Now, it might be, I think Blood Drive is this case, that this is an adventure they ran at their table, and they just wrote it up and published it as, you know, here's what my group did, and you can have your group do it too, and then made it readable so that it reads like a novel, right? It's basically Lonesome Dove in the Weird West, and frankly, if you want to read Lonesome Dove, you may as well read Lonesome Dove because it's a better book than Blood Drive is, right? Because Larry McMurtry is a better writer than whoever it is that wrote Blood Drive. Sorry, he is, right? He's an award-winning, like, published author with, like, 30 books, and this guy is a game writer. Now, he's a very good game writer, you know, and Blood Drive is somewhat entertaining to read, but it's impossible to run as written. And what I thought was, it's a badly written module because the goal should be to run it, and you can't. You have to do massive editing to run it. But that's not the goal. The goal is that you want to read it. And so all they're trying to do is make a module that's readable. And I think with the rule books, it's the same thing. As players, we want the rulebook writers to want to make a balanced, playable game that can be played just by reading the rules and running them as written, right? But what actually they may be doing is trying to write rulebooks that are enjoyable to read, because they know that the overwhelming majority of people who buy the books are never going to play. But if they enjoy reading them, you know, maybe reading them on the toilet, or reading them on the train as they commute, or reading them in the coffee shop, or reading them in bed at night before they fall asleep, and they enjoy reading them, they'll buy another and another and another, and that helps them pay the rent. Which is really an interesting concept, right? The idea that you're going to produce a product that was never meant to be used as it ostensibly was designed is bizarre to me, and it would never even occur to me to do it. But I've encountered some of this type of thing before. In the comic book world, there are comic book companies. Dynamite is one of them, or used to be until a few years ago. I don't know what they're doing now, where they have all of these third-party IPs, right? Like John Carter of Mars, Deja Thoris. I don't know if they have I think they have John Carter of Mars, Deja Thoris, Red Sonja. And what they do, particularly for the girl characters, because they know that their customers are mostly males, probably mostly in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, they produce comics with extremely well done covers, painted, gorgeous, full color. The covers are almost always a full body shot or an upper body shot of this beautiful woman, whether it's Deja Thoris or Red Sonja or whoever, scantily clad, of course. And almost always the cover has nothing to do with the comic. It's just a generic pose that could be anywhere. You know, Red Sonja sitting on a throne with treasure at her feet. It could be from any story of Red Sonja, right? Deja Thoris standing on the Mars landscape. This is John Carter's girlfriend from the John Carter of Mars books. Scantily clad, and maybe holding up a sword and some sort of a shadow of a monster coming across the landscape to attack her, or whatever. But just sort of these generic the kinds of poses you could put on a poster and hang on the wall. And I was very disappointed when I first got back into collecting comics about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. Red Sonja, yeah, I was all over that because I like Red Sonja, and I read that digitally, and it was actually quite good. Michael Avon Oeming wrote it, and Mel Ruby drew it, and it was excellent, actually. So I read a lot of it. The older, like when Red Sonja first came back to being published by Dynamite. But when I went into the comic shop, I recognized the Dynamite logo, and I went over to that section, and I started looking at the other stuff. And Deja Thoris, I'm like, hey, I love Deja Thoris in the books, and I like John Carter, and this looks like a John Carter spinoff. Maybe I should read that. And the cover art was gorgeous, just absolutely beautiful. Wow, what great art. And in my day, years ago, usually the artist of the comic book drew the covers. Walt Simonson drew all his own covers for years. Sal Buscema and Akin and Garvey, or Joe Sinnott as inkers, drew the covers of Rom. And they also drew the inside. And so, yeah, I just assumed that the inside of Deja Thoris would be as nice as the outside. It wasn't. It was simple line drawings, very flat looking, just generic kind of below average comic book art that looked nothing like the cover. And I read a little bit, just flipped through and read a little bit of this story on a couple pages, and it was terrible writing. And I thought, this is awful. The inside is awful. I'm not going to buy this comic. It's got a nice cover, but who the heck would read this thing? But the thing is, I don't know if anybody read it. People were buying Red Sonja, and they were buying Deja Thoris and Ms. Fury and some of the others for the beautiful covers. Not for the inside, not for the story, which was mediocre, not for the art, which was often well below average. It was just for the cover. You buy the comic, you don't even open it, you bring it home, you put it in a Mylar, and you stick it in your, with a backing board, and you stick it in your collection. Like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they sold just as many copies if all they had done is put the cover out as a piece, like on a piece of cardboard, you know, as basically like almost like a giant trading card, but the size of a comic book, and they just put it out as just a cover, because that's all most people, I think, wanted. And so you have me going, oh, why would you buy this comic? Because the inside is terrible. And Dynamite would say, nobody buys our comic books for the insides, they buy our comic books for the covers. As long as we have a good cover, we can sell it. And like, that would never occur to me to do. I mean, you want a good cover, sure, but I would want the inside to be good as the cover, right? I would want it to be something where somebody read it and said, I want to read the next story, regardless of the cover. But that doesn't seem to be what comic books care about. They just, you know, they're just selling the units, and whatever sells the unit is what matters. The story isn't any good, who cares, as long as they sold the unit. That's what editorial must think, right, in the marketing. As long as they can sell units, they don't care what's on the inside. And so, and I think this is why comic books have deteriorated so much over the years, is because it used to matter what the story was inside, and what was on the cover was usually an advertisement, often with words on it. They've gotten away from the words on comic book covers now, unless it's like a crossover symbol to let you know you have to buy this as number 3 in the 10-part crossover series. It used to be, you know, in this issue, Spider-Man versus Dr. Octopus, who will win? Also in this issue, Aunt May goes to China, right? And like, those stories would be in the comic somewhere. Now, sometimes it was a bait and switch, right? The Spider-Man only fought Doc Ock in a dream on the last page of a story that was otherwise about his paper route, right? And Aunt May went to China for 2 panels, right? But it would be in there. And most of the time, the cover was relatively accurate, with just a little bit of inaccuracy to get you to buy the, you know, Supergirl's last stand. That's not really. It's just an issue, right? And she's going to have another stand next month. But at least the artist was the same. No, I don't think I want to go this way. The artist was the same, and the story was more or less what they told you it was going to be about, at least part of the story. One of the stories, if it was a multi-story issue, you know, sometimes a single issue would have... where am I going? Oh, am I going to be able to get over here? I hate this GPS because sometimes you have these, like, double exits, and I can never tell which one I'm supposed to go off on. Yeah, imagine video games. Making a video game nobody was ever expected to play, right? That they make American Truck Simulator with all these great screenshots, and you can get in it and drive the truck, but there's no money, there's no leveling up, there's no traffic on the road, and it's only one truck, right? And I come in it and go, man, this sucks. This is not really a truck simulator. Well, nobody buys it for this truck simulator. What they do is they just take the trucks out to cool all the camera spots and take screenshots. And they post their screenshots to their DeviantArt, right? You're the only one trying to actually run a truck. That's kind of what this is like, which is just, it's just so bizarre to me, and not at all the kind of mindset that I would have if I were producing a product. Like, I would make a product that was meant to be used the way it was meant to be used, and not in some other bizarro way that's not the way it was meant to be used. Obviously, I would fail at business, because this is how people make money, and it would never occur to me to make money that way, I have to say. So yeah, I would absolutely fail at it. But yeah, so that was a very eye-opening comment, and I think it sort of explains a lot of things that have mystified me about role-playing games. Why would you make something that is so clearly unbalanced? They don't care. Nobody's going to play it anyway, right? If they make a Twilight Cleric, a lot of people complain that that's overpowered. I mentioned it in one of my earlier videos. Alright, well, let's say they've sold 1.5 million copies of the book with the Twilight Cleric in it. How many of the people who bought that book are going to run a Twilight Cleric? 15,000? Right? And the other 1,485,000 people who bought the book, it doesn't matter to them whether it's overpowered or not, because all they did was read it and say cool, and maybe go on to D&D Beyond and make up a Twilight Cleric just to see how it levels up, and then they forgot about it. And then the next book came out, and they bought the next book, and it had another overpowered subclass, and they said cool, and they went on to D&D Beyond, and they made up that character. But did they ever actually play? Odds are, for most of them, according to Donnell Shepis, 90% of them, no. They never actually used the book to do what you would think they would do with it, to play the game, to run the adventure. Nope. They just read it like a novel, and then when the next book comes out, and this explains how D&D sells so many books. They put out like an adventure book every quarter, just about, right? And these are long adventure books that can go for, they're couple hundred pages long, and yeah, it's a campaign for levels 1 to 10 or whatever, 17 mini adventures in it, 17 one-shots that would take my group an entire year to play, right? And you're like, they're putting out like 4 of these books a year, let's say a setting book and 3 adventure books in a year, and the setting book has a campaign you could play in it, right? And you're like, how are they selling this many? Everybody seems to buy all of them. Like, how are they selling this many books? Who could play this many adventures this fast? The answer is nobody. Most people are buying these books, reading them for entertainment, and then putting them on the shelf and forgetting about it. Or leaving them in their D&D Beyond account and forgetting about it, right? And so they're not, like, nobody's running them. Very few, right? 10% of the people who bought it are running them. And the other 90% read it and put it on the shelf and said, okay, in a couple months I'll buy the next one. This was a cool story. It sounds like it would be a really fun adventure to run. Can't wait to someday run it, sure. Maybe someday I'll run it. Maybe not even saying that to themselves. Yeah, it's probably cool to run. And I actually know people who've said, made quotations like, boy, I'd love to, I said I would love to, oh, I remember what it was. When my best friend was possibly going to run, I said to him, why don't you run Rime of the Frost Maiden? He had played it and he liked it. And I said, you've seen it played now. It's a lot less work to, it'll be a lot less work to turn it into an adventure you can actually run, because you've seen it played, right? And you have in your mind how it played. As long as you don't fall into the trap of trying to make our group play the way your group played it, let us play it ourselves. You've seen it once. You've done a dry run. You've tested it. This should be great. And then he wasn't in the chat the one time, and I mentioned it to the other players. I said, I told them, you know, Rime of the Frost Maiden, and the one guy was like, oh yeah, that's a really cool adventure. I've read that. It's excellent. I would love to play in that. And I'm like, you read it. Why do you want to play in it now? Right? Well, because he read it and he imagined what it would be like to play it or run it. Now he wants to see if his imagination, I guess, matches what he read. I guess. I didn't really ask him that. But I thought, why are you reading an adventure that you might want to play in? But I guess a lot of people do that. They buy the books, and like, I don't even think he bought it. I think it got shared with us by one of the other players in the content sharing before I turned off. That's at one point you couldn't turn off specific sources. And so I think it got shared with us, and because it was shared with him, he read it. Oh, let me see what this adventure's like, and he read the whole thing. Probably figuring I'm never going to play it anyway, I may as well read it. Right? And I guess that's what a lot of people do. They figure I'm never going to play it anyway, I may as well read it. And so this is why it's so mind-boggling to me. It's been so mind-boggling to me why the books are so badly written, why there's so much overpowered and unbalanced and broken stuff in the books, and why adventures are so badly written from the point of usability by the GM. And the reason, and the answer seems to be, well, we don't write for the people who play the game or run the adventures. We write for the people who don't. Specifically, we target the people who don't play the game and don't run the adventures, because that's 90% of the audience, and all they want to do is read. So we want to make sure our books are readable. I had this, and this sheds light on an argument I had with the same Donald Shepis a few weeks ago, where I argued that a couple of the things in the Suede book were confusing and should be rewritten, and he tried to argue that ambiguity is sometimes better than clarity. And I said, no, it's never better. Clarity is always better. And he said, well, if it's more readable, it's better. And I thought, when is ambiguity ever more readable? And he came out with some crap about how, well, you know, the Starfleet Battles books, the rule books for that, are incredibly technical, and they're never ambiguous. They're super exact. But no one would want to read them. And I'm like, who cares? I'm not buying the book to sit there and read it. I'm buying the book to play the game. And what he was arguing then, and what he was arguing now is, yeah, but most people just buy the book to read it. They don't actually play the games. They just read about the game. And so if the book is entertaining to read, people will buy it, even if they're not going to play it. Now, you might say, well, Scrapper, you've bought a bunch of books that for games you've never played. Yes, but I'm buying them with the intention of playing them, not with the intention of reading them. I own the box set, The Massive Nyarlathotep. It's an award-winning adventure from Call of Cthulhu. I think the 2nd edition or 3rd edition one was award-winning. I don't know if the 7th edition one is that good, but I have the 7th edition one because I got the 7th edition game. What's going on here? Why are we not? Are we? We do not have power to pull this thing up. All right. So I bought it because I heard it was award-winning and it was excellent, and I was like, okay, but was it award-winning because it's a good adventure, runnable adventure? Or is it award-winning because it's fun to read? And the people who gave the award don't even play Call of Cthulhu? Am I hitting the edge here? I might be. Let's see. Seems alright. So they wouldn't even know if it's playable in the game or not, or runnable or not, right? They just know, oh, it reads well. It's a cool story to read, like a novel. Is that what happened? I don't know, but I bet it is what happened. So I have this whole box set, and it's like 4 adventure campaign. It's a big, long thing. I know a little bit about it, but I've never read it because my feeling on this is I'll read it if I'm going to run it. Right? Or if I'm thinking of running it and my group is saying we're going to commit to a really long campaign to Call of Cthulhu because we've tried it a few times and we love it, and we're going to commit to it. And we're going to stay with it for the long term. And I say, I've got 2 long ones, Horror on the Orient Express and Massive Nyarlathotep, and I give them a quick 1-paragraph summary. And they say, Mass sounds better, we want to play it. Okay, I'm going to read it and see if it's good for our group. And if I like it, we'll run it. Right now I read it. And I'm not looking for it to be entertaining and readable. I'm looking at how am I going to run this game. Right? But if I don't do that, if they're not planning to play it with me, I'm not going to read it because I'm hoping to someday play in it if I don't run it. Right? I would like to either run it or play in it. And I'll do either, but I don't want to read it until I know I'm not going to play in it, you know, because that'll spoil it. All right, let's get the bonus XP here, and then we will finish up this episode. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this. Is it news to you? Is it surprising to you that role-playing game companies are actually not writing for the people who play their games and run their adventures? They're actually writing for the people who don't. They're not also writing for the people who don't. They're exclusively writing for the people who don't, because those are the people who buy the books 90% of the time. That just amazes me, and it's not something I ever would have thought went into the design considerations of these books. So let me know what you think. All right, so we have 2,000 extra XP. That levels us up, almost gets us to level 8 or level 7. We're an enthusiast now. And we're going to go ahead and let's try some fragile cargo and hit apply. And now we have $163,000, which is more than enough to buy our first truck. So we're going to go to Western Star. Can we buy online? No. So let's visit the selected dealer. Yep, we want to travel. And we now have the ability to purchase several. We can actually do a little bit bigger of a truck here, right? Well, these are all 370 horsepower. That's 455, but we have to be level 13. All right, so which one do we like better here, guys? Same horsepower. Well, this one's got a bigger tank. This has got the biggest tank. So let's go with the biggest tank. Now we can customize. We're going to do some colors and stuff like that. Let's cancel the Steam stuff. So we can't do anything with that. I think this looks okay. Engine. Can we upgrade it a little bit? We can get a 400 horsepower. We can go up to 410. Heck, we can go up to 455, right? What's the cost right now? Does it say? 118? So let's go to the 455. Should we do the 12 speed? 18 to 1? Let's do that. And then colors. Let's see what we got here. Can we get something cool? What's this one look like? No, don't like that one. Let's keep going down. Oh, no, that looks cool. Big Rocky. I like that. Yeah, I like that design. Alright, let's take it. Wow, okay, it's 148K now, but we're a little bit better of a truck. We got 163, so we're going to have 15,000 left. And we're going to confirm it. And we're going to purchase it. And it should show us the truck. And we're now free as the wind. What that means is we don't have any jobs, and you can drive around in the truck. So now we can actually drive around and go to the other dealers and stuff like that in a truck without a trailer on it, which is a lot easier to maneuver. And we won't like be late for delivering our packages and things like that. So I'll show you the truck. They usually give us a little view of the truck to start out with. I'm not sure if they'll do that on the first one. And we'll do a little bit, and then we will stop, because it's been a long episode. But I just want you guys to see this. So here's our first truck and our garage. And I love that Ram. That is a cool looking picture. And this is our HQ, which is going to cost, I think, $150,000 to upgrade. So they do a nice little shot around the truck. This is our very first Western Star. It's a day cab, so there's no sleeper or anything in it. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect anything. So let's pull in. Shift. Let's pull in. And I'll show you the garage. You can also rest in here, I think, but here we go. So this is our garage. You can have all these garages. We're in Oklahoma City. We have a tiny garage, and you can upgrade it. Right? To do that, we'll add a couple of slots. We could then buy 2 more trucks and have 2 drivers of those trucks, and then we can add an upgrade again and have 2 more. There's our map view of where our garage is in the middle of Oklahoma. Eventually we're going to get garages all over the place, but for now it's the only one we have. So let's just stop by heading around the corner here, and I think we're probably going to want to rest before we try any other jobs, but we're just going to head around the corner and park it at the front. And that's it, guys. We now have our first truck. And I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Again, leave comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree with stuff I said? In this one, I don't know if it's agree or disagree. Let me know if you were surprised at what Shep has said and the fact that only 10% of people actually use the content as you would think they would use it, and 90% of people use it a totally different way, which is why it's written in a way that might surprise you if you're using it the way it's supposed to be used. So let me know if this is news to you, or you already knew this stuff and I was just kind of a blockhead for not realizing it. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper.